Our lesson is in the second chapter of Daniel, beginning with the 14th verse. Daniel 2:14. I want to welcome everyone to the class this morning, particularly those that are live streaming. We appreciate your participation by way of live streaming. Daniel 2:14. Last week we ended with in the midst of a discussion with a very well-known narrative. In fact, the first 6 chapters of Daniel, even the children are very familiar with the narratives in the first 6 chapters of the book of Daniel. Very interesting stories are included in those in that material. We will just jump right into the 14th verse. We'll begin with verse 13. We're right in the midst of this discussion of Nebuchadnezzar having a dream. He didn't remember the dream, and of course nobody could interpret it if he didn't remember the dream. He got so upset with the various advisors and magicians and those people that were supposed to be, knowing the future and that sort of thing that he surrounded himself with. He was so agitated with them that he decided to kill them all, have them all killed. Now, when he made this decision, he must have known that Daniel would be among those people that would be killed, and of course the magicians they couldn't do anything. They couldn't interpret anything. Obviously, their gods couldn't give them any information. And the bottom line of all this is that probably God gave Daniel this dream to make other things work. And by other things work, by having Daniel being able to interpret the dream, as well as reveal the dream to him. So, verse 13 of chapter 2 begins, "And the decree went forth," that is, the decree to kill all the magicians and the advisors to the king. "And the decree went forth that the wise men should be slain, and they sought Daniel and his fellows to be slain." Daniel probably was about doing his business in the government that he was assigned to, and so they sought Daniel. And then Daniel answered with counsel and wisdom to Arioch. Now, what's that word counsel mean? Counsel and wisdom. When you have an issue that needs to go to court, you get legal counsel. Why do you get legal counsel? Well, you need somebody that knows something about the law, right? And the ordinary person, the non-lawyer group, doesn't know much about the law. So he answered with counsel. That is, he knew what he was talking about. He had confidence that God was going to give him the wisdom necessary for this situation. So he answered the Arioch, the captain of the king's guard. That was the executioner, the captain of the executioners, his guard. Obviously, those kings had to have guards at all times, and of course, in the world today, our president has guards, right? Doesn't go any place without guards, and the same was that's been historically the case, because in all nations and all times there are those that want to get the leadership killed off, right? So in verse 15, he answered and said unto Arioch, that is, Daniel said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty from the king? And Arioch made the thing known to Daniel. Daniel saying, well, this order to kill all the wise people, the magicians, that's premature. This is not, and here's this young Hebrew, advisor to the king, challenging the king's authority. Now, that took a lot of courage to challenge that order, you see. Well, he challenged the order, and apparently the king's guard had enough, confidence in Daniel that everything's going to be, okay here. Verse 15 again, he answered and said to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree so hasty? Why is it so harsh? Why is it so the implication was this is an unreasonable thing that the king is doing. Now, whether or not any of these people had at this point in time been killed, whether or not this discussion with Daniel interrupted the killing of the people, the advisors and so forth, I don't know. There's various speculations as to, some scholars think that, they're already a mass slaughter going on, and they were hunting them down, and we just don't know. At least I don't know. Then Daniel went in and desired of the king that he would give him time, that he would show the king the interpretation. Again, a lot of courage. Daniel saying, essentially, let me talk to the king about this. He told the guard, let me talk to the king about this. We'll see if we can get some answers from the king. And he says to the king, I'll show you the interpretation. Now, how did Daniel know that he was going to be able to do that? Why didn't he do it just at that point in time? Why did he have some, time off? Pardon me? Paul, I'm not hearing you. I'm still not hearing you. Yeah, well, he needed to talk to God. I'm sorry, he needed to talk to God, so what's he do? Then Daniel went to the house, made the thing known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, his companions. That's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Now, there were probably other Jews involved in this, but at least these 4 people were prominent, and Scripture doesn't have a space for all the details of most of these narratives. And so they had a discussion that they would desire mercies of God, the God of heaven, concerning the secret, that Daniel and his fellows should not perish, and the rest of the wise men of Babylon. So apparently, with that expression, with the rest of the men of Babylon, that still doesn't give us a firm clue as to whether all of the wise men had been destroyed at this time. It just says that he should not perish with the rest of them. Verse 19, then was the secret revealed unto Daniel in a night vision. Well, apparently at night. when he was sleeping. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. He now goes to God with a prayer. Daniel answered and said, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his. And he changes the times." What's that expression? And he changes the times and the seasons. He changes the times and the seasons. Pardon me? He's in control of the nations. He's in control of the weather, through it, both in natural situations, and we know in God caused when Israel was in a battle, a lot of years previous to this, he arranged hailstones to come down and hit the enemies, right? So he controlled the climate, he controlled the weather, he controlled the nations. He's had total control. He changes the time and the seasons. He removed kings. We ought to be praying that he removes some kings today. That ought to be our prayer to God. He remove some of the troublemaker kings today. He setteth up kings, he giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. Would it be a good idea to pray for wisdom? Well, unless you're pretty smart, unless you're on the level with God, it would be a good idea to pray for wisdom. I mean, think of the number of decisions you're going to make this day. How many decisions you're going to make? Lots of them. How many do you make tomorrow, and the next day, and the next day? Pray for wisdom in those decisions that are made. We talk about people that, people often say, well, they've made some bad choices in the past. Bad choices in the past. Well, they needed to be praying about their daily affairs. And maybe they wouldn't make so many bad choices, you see. So, God said of the kings, he giveth wisdom unto the wise, and knowledge to them that know understanding. Those that are already trying to become wise in the affairs of this life. He revealeth the deep and secret things, and he's talking now about the secret things that God has given Daniel. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and the light dwelleth with him. He can reveal secrets, spiritual matters, and he's going to be revealing some spiritual matters when he interprets the dream. Because this dream is going to relate not only to Babylon, not only to Judaism, to Judah, from that point, from that time on till the first century, but his dream is going to include include information, a narrative about the kingdom of God, the church, and we'll get to that here this morning. He revealed the deep and secret things. He knoweth what is in the darkness, and in the light and the light dwelleth with him. He's omnipresent. He's omnipotent. What's that mean? Omnipotent. I can't even pronounce it. Omnipotent. Just knows it all. Say that, omnipotent.
Omniscient.
Yeah, that's a mission. Is that right? Close. Anyway, he's all-knowing, all-seeing, as we all know. Well, and Daniel says, I thank thee and praise thee, he says, O thou God of my fathers, who hath given the wisdom and might, and hath made known unto me now what we desired of thee, for thou hast now made known unto us the king's matter. Therefore, Daniel, he had this all settled now in his mind. He knew what to say. Therefore, Daniel went in into Arioch. Now, that was, you remember the captain of the guard? The people are going about to slaughter the king's advisors, whom the king has ordained to destroy the wise men of Babylon. He went and said unto them, or unto him, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Now, that's kind of an indication that if some of them had been killed, not all of them had been killed. But he says, destroy not the wise men of Babylon. Maybe none of them had been killed at this point. I don't know. Maybe they were just rounding them up and going to do a mass killing. We don't know. Bring me in before the king, and I will show unto the king the interpretation. Now, when Daniel first approached the king, he said, give me some time. So he needed to commune with God about this, get an answer from God before he actually interpreted the dream. And then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste, and said unto him, I found a man of the captives of Judah. Now, I would think that the king would have known something about Daniel by this time, but he says, I've found. Now that's kind of like, boy, if you have some good news and you can tell it to the governor, that makes you look pretty good, right? You have some good news and you can tell it to some authorities, that makes you look good, right? Don?
In that verse where it says they brought him in haste, sounds like that he was kind of reluctant to do it at the start of the area.
Yeah, he might. Don says that Arioch, the captain of the guard, might not have really had confidence in Daniel previously, but now he seems.
I'm saying that the guard really wasn't had the incentive to kill those people, since he was finding a way out to keep from executing those people. He brought him in haste, immediately to everything.
Yeah. Don's saying that maybe the captain of the guard was a little reluctant to be hasty about doing this job. That what the sense? Okay. But he says, I have found the among the captives. Well, he found him, but Daniel gave Arioch the confidence that he could take care of this task. So let me read that verse again, so we don't get anything lost in it. Then Arioch brought in Daniel before the king in haste. Well, let's go, boy. We're going to get in and see the king. I have found a man in the captives of Judah that will make known unto the king the interpretation. So Daniel convinced Arioch that he could do it. Had he not been able to do it, then Arioch would be in trouble, right? The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar. Now, Belteshazzar was the Babylonian name that they gave him in this, culturalization of him. I don't know whether culturalization is a word or not, but they were trying to change the culture of all of these people that were being groomed to be a part of the Babylonian government. Art thou able to make known unto the dream which I have seen, and the interpretation thereof? I wonder if Daniel would have been tempted to say, yes, sir, I'm a smart guy. I can do it. I mean, some people might give the impression that, they could do it, right? Well, he says, Daniel answered in the presence of the king. Now, how many gods did the Babylonians have? How many gods did Nebuchadnezzar believe in? Probably a lot. And he says, he says, the secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men and the astrologers and the magicians and the soothsayers show unto the king, but there is a God in heaven. Now, Nebuchadnezzar didn't know anything about this God in heaven. It's kind of like Paul on Mars Hill in the Areopagus in the New Testament. The people there that he was preaching to had lots of gods, right? And they had one. Paul noticed a description of a God that says the unknown God. Paul says, that's the God you're missing. And so the God that the Babylonians were missing, right, is able to make known to the king the secrets. So, but there's a God in heaven that revealeth secrets and maketh known to the king, Nebuchadnezzar, what shall be in the latter days. Thy dreams and visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. Now, what's this dream going to be about? It's going to be about what here? Be in the latter days. It's going to be in the future. He's going to talk to him about the future. Now, I wonder why God didn't just tell Daniel or tell some prophet, look, there's going to be here's how history's going to play out. We're going to have a Babylonian kingdom. We're going to have a Medo-Persian kingdom. We're going to have a Grecian kingdom. We're going to have a Roman kingdom. And then we're going to have God's kingdom during the days of the Roman Empire. Wonder why God didn't say that. Why did he have a heathen king dream a dream about the future and have it interpreted? It's just kind of interesting to me that how God operates and how he works, even through the heathen. He used Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, to punish the Jews. He used Nebuchadnezzar to punish the Jews and carry away the Jews into captivity. I guess that reminds us of that God works in mysterious ways. Isn't that a scripture? Doesn't that have scripture behind it? God works in mysterious ways. Well, the dream and the visions are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter. That's what Nebuchadnezzar couldn't remember. But it has to do with what shall come, what should come to pass hereafter, in the future. He that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. God, this God that you don't know anything about, is going to reveal to you your dream. Your dream was about the future, and that future would encompass how many years? 500 or so years and beyond. He says, oh, God's going to reveal something about the next 500 years, and then when you get into the kingdom, to the end of the age, the end of the earth. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I might have. He's not going to take, Daniel's not going to take any credit for this. He says, I have. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have, although Daniel must have been a wise young guy, but it's not due to my wisdom. I have more than any living. I don't have any more wisdom than maybe some of these other dudes that you have surrounding you. But for their sakes that shall be made known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. So, he set the stage here. Before he interpreted the dream, he set the stage. The stage was God of heaven. And I suppose there might have been more conversation between Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar about this Jehovah God that the Jews are associated with. We don't know that, but this probably didn't happen in a 5-minute session. This probably was a long, drawn-out event there. Now here is what the king couldn't remember. Thou, O king, sawest, behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image head was of fine gold. And of course the Babylonians had lots of gold. Tons of gold. But the image's head was of fine gold. The breast and the arms of silver. His belly and his thighs of brass. His legs of iron. His feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet, that were of iron and clay, and brake them into pieces. And then was the iron and the clay, the brass and the silver and the gold, broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them, and the stone that smote the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. Now, so far, does Nebuchadnezzar have a clue as to what this means? No, that's the dream. He just told him what he had dreamed. I don't know much about the dreams that those Old Testament people had. I don't know about dreams of modern day people. But this was a very definitive dream. Big image, head of gold, and so on. But what's it mean? Well, it means nothing yet to the king. Then he says, this is the dream. Now we will give you the interpretation thereof. Verse 37. Thou, king, art the King of kings For the God of heaven, now, Daniel must have talked to the king something about the difference between the God of heaven and the gods that the Babylonians and the other nations worshipped. There had to be some discussion there. He says, he says, for the God of heaven, now, there just had to be some discussion there about who is this God. He hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. Now, you kind of wonder what's going through Nebuchadnezzar's mind at that point. He says, this God that's unknown to Nebuchadnezzar, this God has given you, Nebuchadnezzar. You know, it's not by your own power and might that you have gained this position in world history. It's God that has given you this. And he further says, and wheresoever the children of men dwell, beasts of the field, the fowls of heaven, hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them. Thou art the head of gold. Now, what must Nebuchadnezzar have been thinking at this point?
100% right.
Yeah, Kathy says that he's 100% right. Well, what do you suppose he was thinking? He's probably thinking, well, who is this God that he's talking about? And did this God set it up so that I'm king of the world? That I'm the leader of the known world? Now, wouldn't that be something? To be the leader of the known world. People get all excited about being the leader of a group. Get all excited about being a leader of a village or a township or a county or a state or a nation. But here he's the leader of the world. Now, do you suppose old Nebuchadnezzar got a big head over this? Because later on he's going to say, you know, there's going to be some nations following that aren't quite meeting the gold standard, meeting the standard that, now that Babylonian Empire must have been something else compared to other kingdoms of the world. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee. Now, Nebuchadnezzar's head's probably swelling pretty high, pretty great by that time. And after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. But the brass is not going to be nearly the silver and the brass, not going to be nearly as great as the position that you have. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, forasmuch as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all these shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, no, clay mixed in with iron, partly clay, partly iron, it's going to break apart, right? the kingdom shall be divided, but there shall be in it of the strength of the iron. Forasmuch as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay, or common clay, and as of the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave to one another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Now, we have the advantage of knowing history. This is a projection into the future. And so we know that the Medo-Persian Empire followed the Babylonian Empire, that being silver. And we know that Alexander the Great, the Grecian, set up the Grecian Empire. And we know, about that, and that was a bronze, that's inferior. And then the iron, we know that mixed with miry clay. We know that to be the Roman Empire. And so obviously they didn't have that perspective. They didn't have the perspective that we have, knowing, how these kingdoms played out on the pages of history. We just don't know. Or they just couldn't have. I don't see how they could have even fathomed that. But this information was to be here for all mankind forever, right? As long as the earth lasts. And we have the advantage of seeing how this prophecy played out over time. Well, and then in the days of these kings, now this would be hard for Nebuchadnezzar to understand. In the days of these kings, that is the kingdom with iron mixed with miry clay. In the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all the kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Now, those folks who, and of course the kingdom was the church, but those folks who believe, those premillennialists, dispensationalists that believe that, just in the very near future, if you read the literature of those people that believe that Jesus is going to come back to earth and reign in Jerusalem for 1,000 years, they don't seem to be able to understand what is being said here, that this kingdom that would be carved out of the mountain in the days of the Roman kings, this was going to be a temporary kingdom? Nah, going to be one that stands forever. Forasmuch, in verse 45, forasmuch as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands. Now what's that mean? No human intervention here, right? No Alexander the Great, no Caesars, no Darius or Darius the Persian, the Mede, or Cyrus the Persian. None of those people. This will have nothing to do with some human head in a kingdom. He says, forasmuch as thou sawest the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron and the brass and the clay and the silver and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. No. That was a lot. Sometimes when you're looking at something or thinking of something or understanding something, or somebody's giving a profound sermon or profound speech of some kind, you're just kind of overwhelmed. You just can't take it all in. You can't process it all, all at once. So this Nebuchadnezzar probably wasn't able to process all of this. He probably just, and so he reacts. And it's probably a function of not being able to process all this and get his head around it, get his arms around it. He says, then King Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 46, fell upon his face and worshiped Daniel. It doesn't say here, but you suppose Daniel did anything about that? It would, to be consistent, he would have stopped. He would have been like Paul, right? When some of the folks there in one of the cities, they were going to bring sacrifices to they thought Paul was one of the gods, Well, Paul stopped that foolishness. And I'm sure that Daniel would have stopped that. I assume worship there means the same thing as worship that we understand today. It wasn't just a matter of respect, but I'm sure Daniel declined to be worshipped. He would have had to be. It just couldn't. It's just unfathomable that he would have accepted that as worship. And it commanded that they should offer an oblation and sweet odors unto him. I imagine that Daniel was running like a scalded dog just to get away from that scene. And then the king answered unto Daniel and said, of a truth it is that your God is the God of gods. Now, some people have the idea, some scholars have suggested that Nebuchadnezzar was converted to Judaism. That is, he became a proselyte. When we look at his behavior, future behavior, that idea is probably shot down. But he says, at least he says, Daniel's God is superior to these gods where we have massive temples and massive sacrifices to these gods. At least they acknowledge that God was the God of gods, that is, and a Lord of kings. He seemed to recognize that Daniel's God maybe really did set Nebuchadnezzar up as the ruler of the known world. So he recognized there's something unique and special and awesome about this God compared to the stones and the wooden figures that they set up as gods. And he was certainly the revealer of secrets, because his advisors, his magicians, his people that related to the Babylonian gods, they couldn't reveal any secrets. Of a truth, that your God is the God of gods, Lord of lords, or Lord of kings, revealer of secrets, seeing thou couldst revealed this secret. Then the king made Daniel a great man, gave him many great gifts. Reminds us of Joseph in Egypt when he revealed dreams of the king. Made him ruler over the whole province of Babylon, chief of the governors, and all the wise men of Babylon. Do you suppose that some of the other minions of the king, operatives of the king, do you suppose some of those folks became jealous? You suppose they became envious? Think?
Should have been great if we saved their lives.
But do you think that they were really grateful?
Well, that probably wore off pretty fast.
Yeah. So, they were probably very envious and thinking, what's this young Jew, this young guy from Judea, what's he going to do, ruling over us? Then Daniel, and here's why I dwell on this. Then Daniel requested of the king, and he set Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego over the affairs of the province of Babylon. But Daniel sat at the gate of the king. That is, Daniel was kind of chief among them, but he got his companions involved in government. Now, I mention that because what's going to happen to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego later on? The people that were envious, they reported him. Right? So, with position, there's always trouble, right? For the person in the position. Well, we'll pick up there at chapter 3 next week.